My boss humiliated me in front of her guests with a single sentence. She said that people like me should be grateful just to have a job. What she didn't know was that I had crossed an ocean, left my children behind, and spent more than a decade working in silence to give them a better future. For years, I swallowed humiliation, hid my pain from my own family, and lived as if I were invisible. But on that day, something inside me changed. And the decision I made after hearing those words ended up transforming my life in a way that no one in that house could have imagined. The morning my boss said those words to me, I was standing in her kitchen holding a ceramic dish I had just pulled from the oven. It was heavy, a lamb shoulder braised in red wine with herbs I had spent 40 minutes preparing, and my hands were tired, the way they always were by that hour of the evening. I had been on my feet since 9 in the morning. She said it so casually, the way people say things they have rehearsed inside their head for a long time, but never thought twice about. She looked at me and said that people like me should be grateful to God for having a job, considering where I came from. People like me. I stood there. I did not move. I did not cry. I just held that dish in both hands and felt something inside me go very, very quiet. There were 3 of her friends in the living room, and at least one of them had heard. I could feel it. That silence that comes after someone says something they should not have said, that specific kind of silence. I set the dish down on the counter. I said nothing. I went back to the stove and finished what I was doing, but inside something closed, like a door you shut gently because you do not want to make a noise, but you know it is the last time you will open it. My name is Pushpa. I am 55 years old now. I have been living in the United States for 14 years. And for the last 2 of those years, I have been fully legal. But before that, I spent 12 years invisible. Working, breathing, sleeping, all of it invisible. I was born in a small city in the state of Minas Gerais in Brazil. My family was not rich and was not exactly poor either. We were the kind of poor that looks fine from the outside. My mother kept the house clean. My father worked in construction. We ate every day. But there was never anything left over, never anything saved. And as I got older and had my own children, I understood that kind of life in a way I had not understood it as a child. I had 2 children before I turned 30, my daughter Priya and my son Arjun. Their father was a good man in some ways, and not good in others, the way most people are. We separated when Priya was 7 and Arjun was 4. After that, I was alone with 2 small children, working whatever jobs I could find, cleaning houses, helping in a bakery, watching other people's children. In Brazil, that kind of work pays almost nothing. You work hard, and you stay exactly where you are. I was 38 years old when I made the decision. I am not going to tell you it was a brave decision, because it was not brave. It was desperate. There is a difference. Brave people have options and choose the hard path. Desperate people have no options and choose the only path that is in front of them. A woman I knew from my neighborhood had gone to the United States 3 years before. She cleaned houses in a city called Newark, New Jersey. She was not rich, but she was sending money home every month, and her children were eating well and going to school without worrying. She called me one evening and said, "Pushpa, just come. The first year is hard, but after that, it gets better." I believed her because I needed to believe something. The hardest part was not getting on the plane. The hardest part was the night before. Priya was 18 by then, and Arjun was 15. They were old enough to understand what was happening, and that made it worse, not better. If they had been small, maybe I could have made it into an adventure, but they were old enough to know that their mother was leaving and did not know exactly when she was coming back. I made dinner that night, rice and beans the way my mother always made them, with the pork and the bay leaf and the orange peel. I wanted the house to smell like home for one more night. I wanted them to eat something I had made with my own hands before I disappeared. Priya ate quietly. She did not cry at the table. She got that from me, that ability to hold things inside until the right moment. Arjun cried. He was 15, and he cried, and he did not apologize for it. And I held him, and I felt my chest splitting open in a way I cannot describe even now. My mother was there too. She sat at the table and ate and said almost nothing. Before I went to bed, she came to my room and sat on the edge of the mattress and said, "I do not understand why you have to go so far. There are people who make it here. Why do you always think the answer is somewhere else? I did not argue with her. I just said, I am not going for me. I am going for them. She did not look convinced. And maybe she was right not to be in some ways. But I did not know that yet. Newark in November is a cold that gets inside you. I had never experienced cold like that. In Minas Gerais, even in winter, the cold is manageable. You put on a sweater and you are fine. In Newark, I wore everything I had brought, and I was still cold, standing at bus stops at 5:30 in the morning, waiting for a bus that was always late, my breath coming out in clouds in front of my face. The woman who had brought me there, her name was Conceição, she was from my same neighborhood. She had a one-bedroom apartment that she shared with 2 other Brazilian women. I slept on a mattress on the floor in the living room for the first 4 months. I paid her $200 a month for that mattress, which was almost a third of what I made at the beginning. The work was cleaning. Houses, offices, sometimes a restaurant kitchen on weekends. Conceição had built a small network over 3 years, and she let me work inside it, which I was grateful for. But gratitude has limits, and I learned that quickly. The pay was low. The hours were long. And because I was undocumented, I could not say a word about any of it. You learn how to make yourself small. You learn how to enter a house, do your work, and leave without being noticed. You learn how to absorb being spoken to in a way that is not unkind, but is not kind either. The way some people speak to someone they do not fully see as a person. Not cruel, just absent. Like you are part of the furniture. I was not part of the furniture. I was a woman who had left her children on the other side of the world to clean other people's houses in the cold. But nobody in those houses knew that, and I did not tell them. The first time I called Priya and Arjun from America, I locked myself in the bathroom of Conceição's apartment and sat on the edge of the bathtub with my phone in my hands. I had bought a cheap international plan. The call lasted 11 minutes. Arjun showed me his school notebook through the screen. He was proud of something he had drawn. Priya sat next to him and smiled, but her eyes were doing something her mouth was not. I know my daughter's eyes. I smiled the whole call. I told them the apartment was nice. I told them the weather was different but interesting. I told them I was already meeting people and making money, and that soon, things were going to change for all of us. When the call ended, I sat on the edge of that bathtub for a long time. I did not cry right away. I just sat there in the dark with the phone in my lap, listening to the sounds of the apartment outside the door, the television, someone washing dishes, and I thought about the smell of the rice I had made the night before I left. I missed my own kitchen. I missed the particular way my house smelled. I missed the weight of Arjun's head on my shoulder when he was tired, the way he still let me hold him even at 15, because he was that kind of boy. I missed Priya's quiet, the way she could sit in the same room as me, and we would not need to say anything. I sat there until I was sure my face was ready. Then I opened the bathroom door and went to make myself some tea. There is a specific kind of tired that has nothing to do with sleep. You can sleep 8 hours and wake up with it still sitting on your chest, heavy and familiar, like it never left. That was the tired I carried through my second year in Newark. By then I had moved out of Conceição's living room and into a small room I rented from a Brazilian couple in the ironbound neighborhood. It was not much, a single bed, a window that looked out onto a brick wall, a shared bathroom down the hall, but it was mine. I could close the door and be alone, which had become the most valuable thing in my life. I was cleaning 4 houses a week by then, plus a dental office on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I left the house before 6 every morning, and most days I did not come back until after 8 at night. In winter, that meant I left in the dark and came home in the dark. I sometimes went 2 or 3 days without seeing natural sunlight. I would walk from the bus stop to the house with my hood pulled down over my face and think about nothing, because thinking took energy I did not have. The couple I rented from, Rogério and his wife Fernanda, were from São Paulo. They had been in the United States for 9 years and had a system. They rented out 2 rooms in their apartment to other Brazilians, always newly arrived, always undocumented, always desperate enough to pay whatever they asked. They were not cruel people, but they were people who had been through their own hard years and had decided that survival meant taking every advantage available to you. I understood that logic. I just did not always like being on the wrong side of it. Fernanda knew people who needed house cleaners. She would refer me to them. But she kept a percentage of what I made, 10% from every client she had connected me to. She called it a finder's fee. I called it the cost of not knowing anyone in a foreign country. I paid it every week without complaint, because complaining would have meant finding somewhere else to live, and I could not afford that. This is how it works when you are invisible. There is always someone slightly less invisible than you, and they charge you for the difference. I had been working for my first real long-term employer for about 8 months when she started asking me to stay late on Fridays. Her name was Margaret. She was a woman in her early 60s, thin, well-dressed, the kind of woman who had always had help in her house and treated that help with a specific kind of politeness that was really just indifference with good manners. She lived in a large house in Short Hills, New Jersey. I took 2 buses to get there. At first, the Friday evenings were occasional. She would call me Thursday night and ask if I could stay a few extra hours the next day because she had guests coming. I always said yes, because the extra money mattered. She paid me for those hours. Not well, but she paid. Then it became every other Friday. Then it became every Friday. And somewhere along the way, staying late on Fridays became part of what was expected without anyone ever officially changing the agreement we had made. If I mentioned it, she would look slightly confused, as if I were raising a subject she could not quite place. "We always do this on Fridays," she would say. "I thought you knew." I had not known, but knowing or not knowing made no difference by then. What made it worse was watching how she treated the catering people when she brought them in for larger events. She would tip them generously. She thanked them by name. She walked through the kitchen asking if they needed anything, offering them food and drinks, treating them like guests who were doing her a favor. Then she would come into the other part of the kitchen where I was working and walk past me the way you walk past a counter. I was not invisible to her in the way that is dramatic, the way it looks in films. It was quieter than that. She saw me. She knew my name. She would sometimes ask about my health, but she did not see me the way she saw those other people. I was part of the house, and the house did not need to be thanked. I cooked things for her dinner parties that her guests praised loudly and specifically. I once heard a man in the living room ask Margaret where she had found her caterer, that the lamb was extraordinary. She said something I could not hear clearly. Later, one of her friends found me in the kitchen while I was cleaning up and said, "That was the most beautiful meal I have had in years." She said it looking directly at me, and she meant it. Margaret never said it to me directly, not once in the time I worked for her. The video calls with Priya and Arjun were the best and worst part of every week. I had a routine. Every Sunday morning, before I did anything else, I would make myself tea, sit at the small desk in my room, and call them. I always made sure the background behind me looked calm. I kept a small plant on the desk. I had bought it at a dollar store, a plastic thing, but it looked real enough on a screen. I wanted the background to look like I was fine, like I had a life that made sense. I had learned how to perform fine, how to smile the right amount, how to answer questions with just enough detail to seem truthful without saying anything true. When Arjun asked if I had friends, I said yes. I had a few people I knew from work. When Priya asked if I was eating well, I said yes, absolutely. I even cooked sometimes on weekends. Neither of those things was exactly a lie. They were just missing all the parts that would have made them real. What I did not tell them, that I had cried in a bathroom stall at the dental office I cleaned, because one of the dentists had spoken to me sharply in front of a patient for something that was not my fault, and I had nodded and apologized and held everything inside until I could lock a door behind me. That I had eaten rice and butter for dinner 4 nights in a row one week because I was trying to save enough to send extra money home before Arjun's school fees were due. That some mornings I lay in bed for 20 minutes before getting up, not because I was tired, but because starting the day required a decision I did not always feel capable of making. I told them I was proud of them. I told them I was doing well. I told them it would not be much longer. That last part, I had been saying that since the first year. I kept moving the horizon forward, and they kept believing me, and I kept hoping that one day I would actually be able to close the distance between the promise and the truth. The thing about performing happiness for long enough is that eventually you start to lose track of where the performance ends. I would hang up the call and sit there wondering what I actually felt beneath the smile I had been holding for 45 minutes, and sometimes I genuinely could not tell. I knew I loved them. That part never blurred. That was the one thing that remained completely clear, no matter how tired or lost I became. But the rest of it, whether I was okay, whether I was happy, whether any of this was worth what it was costing, those questions had no clean answers anymore. One evening in the 3rd year, I came home from a 12-hour day to find a message from my sister on my phone. It was not a call, just a text message. She said that my mother had been asking questions about the money I was sending home, whether it was enough, whether I could send more. She said that some people in the family were starting to wonder if maybe I was doing well and keeping things for myself. I read that message 3 times. I had not bought new shoes in a year and a half. I was eating rice and butter 4 nights a week. I was sleeping in a room smaller than my mother's pantry back home. And the people who knew me best in the world were wondering if I was keeping money for myself. I put the phone down on the desk. The plastic plant sat there next to it, green and still and completely unaware of anything. I did not cry that night. I was too tired to cry. I just lay on the bed with my coat still on and stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of Rogerio watching television in the next room, that specific laugh track from some American comedy show, and I thought, nobody knows. Nobody at all knows what this looks like from inside. And I was not sure I wanted them to know, because telling the truth would have meant admitting that the promise I had been repeating for 3 years, "It won't be much longer, it won't be much longer," might have been a promise I had never had the means to keep. The morning I could not get out of bed was a Tuesday in February, 4 years into living in the United States. I do not mean I did not want to get out of bed. I mean I physically could not. I woke up at 5:15 the way I always did, and I turned to put my feet on the floor, and my body simply did not cooperate. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. My arms were heavy. There was a pain in my chest that was not sharp enough to be a heart attack, but persistent enough to frighten me. A deep, dull pressure, like something sitting on top of me that I could not see. I lay there for a long time. The alarm on my phone went off again at 5:30, and I looked at it and turned it off and did not move. I missed work that day for the first time since I had arrived. I did not call a doctor, because calling a doctor cost money I was not prepared to spend. I did not call anyone at all. I just lay in that room with the window that looked onto the brick wall, and I let the day pass over me like water, which was something I had never allowed myself to do before. Rogerio knocked on my door around noon to ask if I was all right, and I said yes, just a small fever. I will be fine tomorrow. He said okay and left. I was not fine, but I had been saying I was fine for so long that the words came out automatically before I had even decided to say them. What happened over the following weeks was not dramatic. There was no single moment of collapse, no breaking point that looked like the ones in films. It was more like a slow leak. Things that I had always been able to manage started to slip. I forgot appointments. I showed up to one of my houses on the wrong day. I left a client's kitchen half cleaned and only realized it when I was already on the bus. And I sat there for a moment trying to decide if I had the energy to go back. And the fact that I had to think about it at all told me something was wrong. I had always been meticulous. Cleanliness was not just my job. It was my standard, the thing I held on to as proof that no matter what else was falling apart, I was still doing something right. When I started letting things slide, I felt it the way you feel a tooth that is starting to loosen. Not a crisis yet, but a warning. I went to a free clinic in Newark on a Saturday morning and waited 2.5 hours to see a doctor. She was a young woman, kind, clearly overworked. She took my blood pressure and it was high. She asked me about my sleep, my diet, my stress levels. I answered honestly for the first time in a long time, and hearing myself answer honestly felt strange, like speaking a language I had almost forgotten. She said I was not in immediate danger, but that if I continued the way I was going, I would be. She gave me information about a blood pressure medication I could get cheaply, and she told me I needed to reduce my stress. She said it plainly, the way doctors say things that are true and impossible at the same time. I thanked her and walked out into the cold and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Reduce your stress. I almost laughed. Almost. Around that same time, something started happening with Arjun. He had turned 19 by then. He was living with my mother while he studied, and for a while the calls between us had been warm in the way they always were. Him showing me things, telling me about his classes, asking questions about America that I answered carefully and partially. But something had shifted. The calls got shorter. His answers got smaller. He started having reasons why he could not talk on Sundays. I told myself he was busy. Young men get busy. It is normal. But then one evening Priya called me separately, without Arjun, which she almost never did, and she said, "Mummy, I need to tell you something." She said it the way you say something you have been carrying for weeks, trying to figure out the right moment. She told me that some people in the family, she did not say who, but I knew, had been talking to Arjun, telling him things, saying that if I really loved them, I would have found a way to come back by now, that the money I sent was less than what someone doing well in America should be sending, that maybe I had built a life there for myself, and the children had become secondary. Secondary. I sat with that word for a long time after the call ended. My son, my boy who had cried at 15 when I left, who had showed me his school notebook through a phone screen, was starting to believe that he was secondary to me, because people who had never spent a single day in my shoes were filling his ears with their own version of a story they knew nothing about. I want to be honest about what that did to me, because I think it is important. It did not make me angry at first. Anger came later. What it did first was confirm a fear I had been carrying since the day I left Brazil, that the longer I was gone, the more the story of my absence would be written by other people, and those other people would not write it kindly, because kindness requires understanding, and understanding requires having been there. I had protected my children from the real version of my life in America because I did not want them to worry, because I wanted them to sleep well at night, because I wanted the sacrifice to look clean and purposeful from where they were standing. But in protecting them from the truth, I had left a space, and that space had been filled with something worse than the truth. It had been filled with doubt. That night I sat on the edge of my bed, and I thought about calling Arjun. I picked up the phone 4 times and put it down 4 times. What would I say? How do you explain 4 years of silence to a 19-year-old who has been told a different story for months? How do you say, every single thing I told you I was fine about, I was not fine about. I was not ready. I did not make the call. Instead, I did what I had always done. I got up the next morning. I put on my coat. I took the bus. I cleaned Margaret's house from top to bottom, and I cooked her a dinner that her friends praised, and she accepted without a word to me. And I took the bus home in the dark, and I sat on my bed, and I was so tired that the tiredness had no shape anymore. It was just the air inside the room. The day Margaret said what she said to me, I had already been thinking about leaving for months. I had been offered a small raise, not enough, nothing close to enough, and I had accepted it because I did not know what else to do. I had been cooking her dinner parties for nearly 2 years by then. I had made food that grown men went quiet over. I had organized her kitchen, trained myself on dishes I had never made before, spent my own time watching videos and reading to get better, to make the food worthy of the table she was serving it at. I had done all of this without being asked to, because I had pride in my work, even when no one acknowledged it. She had friends who noticed. One of them in particular, a woman named Sandra, elegant, warm in a way that did not feel performed, always found me after dinners to say something specific. Not just good food, but that sauce you made with the mushrooms, I have been thinking about it all week. That kind of specific. The kind that tells you a person actually tasted what you made. And then came that Friday evening. I had told Margaret the week before that I could not stay late this particular weekend. My husband's birthday. We had plans. Nothing expensive, just dinner, the first time in months we had managed to be in the same place with a reason to celebrate. I had told her clearly. She had said nothing clear in return, which I had taken as agreement. When Friday came and I prepared to leave at the regular time, she came into the kitchen with 2 of her friends nearby, and she said it, that people like me should be grateful for what we have, considering where we came from. Her friends went quiet. One of them, Sandra, I saw her face change. I set down what I was holding. I said nothing. I finished the last thing I was doing. I put on my coat. I went home. The next day, I called and said I was leaving. I told her the original agreement had been no weekends, and that I would not stay somewhere I was being humiliated for small scraps. I told her I was proud of where I came from. She said very little. People rarely have words for when someone they underestimated speaks clearly. I did not know what came next. I had some savings. Not much. Enough for maybe 6 weeks. I sat in my room that evening and looked at the plastic plant on the desk and felt something I had not felt in a long time, a strange, fragile lightness, like putting down something heavy and not yet knowing if your arms would remember how to exist without the weight. I was 53 years old. I was legal now, finally, after years of paperwork and waiting and hoping. I had my dignity. I had my cooking, which I had always been good at and had become something more than good at through years of quiet practice in other people's kitchens. I did not know yet that my phone would ring 3 days later. I did not know yet that the voice on the other end would be Sandra's. But I was about to find out that sometimes the moment you stop accepting less than you deserve is exactly the moment the right thing finds room to reach you. Sandra called on a Wednesday morning, just after 9. I was in my room folding laundry when the phone rang. An unknown number, but a local one. I almost did not answer. I had been getting calls from Margaret's number in different forms all week, and I was not ready for another conversation that would ask me to reconsider, to be understanding, to remember how much I needed the work. I was tired of conversations that started with my needs and ended with someone else's convenience. But I answered. Her voice was calm and direct. She said, "Pushpa, this is Sandra. We have met several times at Margaret's." She paused, as if giving me a moment to place her. I already had. She said she had heard I was no longer working there and that she wanted to ask if I would be willing to meet for coffee, just to talk. No obligation in either direction. I said yes. I do not know exactly why. Maybe because her voice had no performance in it, no sweetness that was covering something else. It was just a voice asking a simple question. We met at a small cafe near her building 2 days later. She was already there when I arrived, sitting with 2 cups of coffee on the table, which told me she had paid attention at some point to how I took mine. Small things like that say a great deal about a person. She did not waste time. She said she had been thinking about making a change with her household for a while, and that every time she had sat at Margaret's table eating food I had made, she had thought, "This woman is not being treated the way her work deserves." She said she wanted to offer me a position. She named a salary that was almost double what Margaret had been paying me. She said weekends would only happen for specific occasions, would always be discussed in advance, would always be compensated separately, and that she would provide catering help so that I would be coordinating rather than carrying the full weight alone. I listened to all of it. When she finished, I asked her one question. I said, "Do you treat the people who work for you like people?" She looked at me for a moment, then she said, "I try to. And if I ever fall short of that, I want you to tell me." That was the right answer. Not a promise of perfection, just a commitment to honesty. I said yes. The building where Sandra lived was the same building where Margaret had her apartment. I did not know this until the day I arrived for my first week of work, took the elevator up, and the doors opened on a floor below Sandra's to reveal Margaret standing there with a shopping bag in one hand and her phone in the other. She looked at me, the way people look at something that does not fit the scene they were expecting. Her expression went through several things very quickly. Surprise, then something almost like embarrassment, then the particular kind of composure that people with money learn to reach for in uncomfortable moments. She said hello. She said my name. She said she had heard I was working for Sandra now. I said yes, that Sandra had called me as soon as she heard I was available. Margaret said that was nice. The elevator came and we rode up together in silence for 2 floors. When she stepped out, she said it was good to see me doing well. I said thank you, and the doors closed, and I stood there for a moment, looking at my own reflection in the metal doors, and felt something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite sadness, something more complicated than either, the way things usually are when a long chapter finally ends. The first months working for Sandra were different in ways I had to learn how to receive. She thanked me, specifically and regularly, not the way people thank appliances for working correctly, but the way people thank other people, with attention, with detail, noticing particular things. She would come into the kitchen while I was working and ask questions about what I was making, not to supervise, but because she was genuinely curious. She remembered that I had a husband. She asked about him by name. Once, when I mentioned that I had been having some trouble with my blood pressure, she looked at me seriously and said, "Please do not push yourself on days when you are not well. The work will wait." I had to sit with that for a while. The work will wait. I had spent so many years being the one who waited, for recognition, for basic consideration. For someone to see the distance between what I was giving and what I was receiving, that being told something else could wait, felt almost foreign. I did not cry about it, but I thought about it for days. The lunch happened on a Saturday in April. Sandra was hosting a gathering for some business associates. Serious people, the kind whose schedules did not have much space in them, and who therefore brought full attention to whatever they showed up for. She had arranged for a small catering team to assist me. My job was to plan the menu, prepare the centerpiece dishes, and coordinate everything else. I spent 2 days thinking about what to make. Not because I was nervous. I was past being nervous about cooking, but because I wanted it to be right. I wanted it to be the kind of meal that stayed with people, the kind they would remember not just as food, but as an experience of being cared for by whoever had made it. I made a slow-roasted spiced leg of lamb with a pomegranate reduction, a saffron rice with toasted almonds and dried fruit, a roasted vegetable dish with yogurt and herbs, fresh bread I had started the night before, a dessert of semolina cake soaked in rosewater syrup, something from my own history, something no catering menu had ever offered these people before. When the guests sat down and the food was served, the room changed in the way rooms change when people taste something made with genuine care. The conversation slowed. People started paying attention to what was in front of them. Margaret was there. I had not known she would be. Sandra had not mentioned it, or perhaps she had, and I had not processed it. I saw her when I came out briefly to check on something, and our eyes met for a moment across the room. She looked away first. After the meal, Sandra did something I had not expected. She came into the kitchen while I was supervising the cleanup, and she asked me to come out to the dining room for a moment. I took off my apron and followed her. She introduced me to her guests. She said my name clearly, said I had been cooking for her for several months, and said that everything they had eaten that afternoon had come from my hands and my knowledge. Then she said, this was the best hiring decision I made all year. The room applauded, not politely, genuinely. I stood there and I received it. I did not deflect. I did not look at the floor. I stood up straight and I said thank you, and I meant it. Margaret was sitting at the far end of the table. I did not look at her to see her reaction. I did not need to. What was happening in that room had nothing to do with her anymore. That evening, after everyone had left, and the kitchen was clean, and the catering team had gone, I sat alone for a few minutes in Sandra's kitchen before heading home. The light was good. The room smelled of rosewater and lamb, and the particular kind of quiet that comes after a space has been full of people and food and noise. I thought about Arjun. I had been thinking about him more than usual in those weeks. Something had been loosening inside me, whatever I had used for years to keep the real story contained, and I could feel it coming undone. Not in a frightening way, more like the way a fist slowly opens after it has been clenched for a very long time. I called him that night, not on Sunday morning at the usual time, just called him, unexpectedly, on a Saturday evening. He answered on the second ring. His voice was surprised. He said, "Mummy, is everything okay?" I said yes. I said, I just wanted to talk. And then, for the first time in 14 years, I told him the truth. Not all of it at once, but enough. I told him about the room with the brick wall outside the window. I told him about the bus in the cold at 5:30 in the morning. I told him about eating rice and butter to save money for his school fees. I told him about the bathroom stall in the dental office. I told him about the years of being invisible in other people's houses, and what it costs to be invisible for that long, and how I had kept all of it away from him and Priya because I wanted them to sleep. He was quiet for a long time. I could hear him breathing. Then he said, "Mummy, why didn't you tell us?" I said, "Because I wanted to protect you, and because I was ashamed. Not of the work, never of the work, but ashamed that the distance between the promise I kept making and the reality I was living was so large, and I did not know how to cross it out loud." He cried. He was 23 years old, and he cried, and this time I did not hold mine in either. We cried together across an ocean, which sounds like something from a film, but was just two people who loved each other finally putting down the weight they had both been carrying alone. He said, "The things people said about you. I should never have listened." I said, "You were young. You needed an explanation, and I had not given you one." That was my fault, too. Priya flew to visit me that summer, the first time any of my children had seen me in America. She landed at Newark Airport on a Thursday afternoon, and I stood at the arrivals gate, and watched her come through the doors, tall, composed, her mother's eyes. And when she saw me, she crossed the distance between us in a few steps and held me, and I held her back. And we stood like that in the middle of that airport for a long time. She saw the room. She saw the bus I took. She came to Sandra's with me one day and watched me work. She watched me coordinate the catering team, watched me plate a dish with the attention I had always brought to everything in a kitchen. Watch Sandra speak to me the way you speak to someone you respect. On her last night, we sat in my room after dinner, and she was quiet for a while, and then she said, "I did not understand before. I understand now." That was all she said. It was enough. I am 55 years old. I have been in this country for 14 years, and I am legal, and I am still here, and I am still cooking. My blood pressure is better. I have real shoes now. I have a kitchen I feel proud in. I have an employer who sees me. I think sometimes about what it cost, not in money, though it costs that too, but in the invisible currency of years. Years of performing fine, years of shrinking, years of absorbing the particular indignity of being unseen in a room you have just made beautiful. I do not want those years back. You cannot want back what made you who you are, but I want people to know they happened. I want someone reading this in a small room somewhere, tired and cold and far from the people they love, to know that being invisible does not mean you are not there. You are there. All of it is real. The sacrifice is real. The love behind it is real. And someday, not always quickly, not always cleanly, but someday, someone will see what you made and say your name in a room full of people and mean it. Hold on until then. It is worth it to hold on.